My name is Amber Mays. I am the Holocaust Education and Program Coordinator for the Jewish Federation of Greater Indianapolis and Candles Holocaust Museum. So just a little bit about myself. I am a graduate of Westfield High School. Looks like, unfortunately, some of my previous teachers that had registered aren't here yet. But and then I went to Ball State and got my degree in anthropology. And from there, I went to Stockton University and got my master's in Holocaust and genocide studies. My focus tends to be on how we make those contemporary connections between the lessons of the Holocaust to human rights violations and mass violence occurring in our world today, particularly with Central Africa. So a little bit about candles. I'm going to see if I can see everybody. How many people know of Candles Holocaust Museum? All right, so a couple. Hi, Liz. Yes, I recognize you. And Matt, and obviously Tony here. All right, so quite a few of you. So for those of you that are unfamiliar, Candles Holocaust Museum was founded in Terre Haute, Indiana, which is a small city in western Indiana, by Holocaust survivor Eva Mozes Kor. And we'll learn a little bit more about her story as we go through this webinar. But she was a survivor of the Mengele twin experiments in Auschwitz concentration camp. So she established Candles Holocaust Museum in memory of her sister who had passed away several years before, and also in honor of the other twins, the survivors, as well as those who did not make it out of Auschwitz alive. And that was established, she established the museum in 1995. In 2003, the museum was firebombed by an arsonist and burned to the ground completely. With support from the community and other organizations, a new museum building was opened in 2005 and remains a very important piece of the community today. So I would also like to welcome Sherry Bard. She is going to be our facilitator for this webinar today, and she is with Echoes and Reflections, and I will let her tell you more about herself and the organization.
Okay, I hope everybody can hear me. So I want to thank all of you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to meet you virtually over Zoom. I also want to thank Leah Simpson and Amber Mays for organizing this professional development offering and inviting all of you to join us today. So my name is Sherry Bard, and I am the facilitator for today. I'd like to begin by telling you a little bit about myself. I don't know if you could tell by my slight accent, but I'm originally from New York. I moved several decades ago to Los Angeles, California, where I am today. So it's just a little bit after 9 here. I've worked in the field of Holocaust education and remembrance for about 25 years already, and many of those years were spent working at USC Shoah Foundation, and they're one of the partners in Echoes and Reflections. So for some of that time while I was there, I also had the privilege of working on the Education Committee of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. I'm sure many of you have visited that museum. It's amazing. I'm also a consultant for Chapman University's Holocaust Art and Writing Project. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it's a program that's been around for about 21 years, and it's a wonderful learning experience. I'm a former classroom teacher. I taught English and special education, and I actually have a personal connection to the Holocaust. I am the daughter of a Holocaust survivor from Poland. and here's a picture of my father, Henry. This is a post-war picture of him soon after the war ended. And then some years later, he gave his testimony to the USC Shoah Foundation, his interview, and that's a picture of him there. So I'm a senior trainer for Echoes and Reflections. I'm also a huge fan of that project. So here's a picture of me. And I want to just take a moment to make sure everyone is set up for the Zoom experience. We've all become semi-experts in this technology, but I just wanted to make a few reminders to you. You want to make sure your video is on, and that's at the should be at the bottom of your screen, but your mute button is also on. We're a group right now of nearly 20 people, so it's hard to get everybody talking at the same time. So if you'd like to speak, I would suggest that you put your name in the chat box, or there's a function you might have on your computer, raise your hand. You could do that, and I will call on you. You should also make sure your chat function, which is on the bottom of the screen, is enabled. You'll get that little sidebar, and you want to make sure that it might say all panelists and attendees, or everyone, and that you have that selected so that we can see who's speaking. Just one second. I just want to make sure everything is plugged in here. I'm having something with my connection. See, we have to make sure the, 1 second. All right, here we go. All right. Also on the upper right-hand corner, you have this box. You could select this gallery view, see many people. You could minimize that, and you could play around with that. If you also have another device handy, like a smartphone or an iPad, I suggest you have that handy. We're gonna do a breakout room experience, and we're gonna give you a link to connect with a resource to explore. We're also going to use Menti or Mentimeter, and so it would be helpful to have that. If you don't have an extra device, you could also open another tab in your computer. And I also recommend that you keep a pad and pen handy. That would be helpful in case you want to take down any notes. You could take a bio break whenever you need it. Our session will go for 3 hours. We'll plan to take about 2 breaks. And also, since we're all sort of getting used to this online world, let's just be very patient and graceful and supportive of each other as we navigate this new world that we're living in. So next, I would like to ask you to introduce yourself. So I came up with 3 questions, and I would like to ask you to use the chat function, and 3 things. If you can say where and what you teach, and if you're still in school, that's okay. I know we have somebody who's at the university, you could say that. And if you've taught the Holocaust, how long you've taught it approximately, or if you're new to the topic. And then just for fun and kind of to get to know each other, name a book you've read or a movie or a TV show you've watched over the past few months during this COVID time, and that you could recommend. And you can be as serious or as silly as you want. So for example, I would say, hi, I'm Sherry Bard. I'm from Echoes and Reflections. I've been teaching about the Holocaust for more than a dozen years, and I could recommend the movie Just Mercy on Amazon, or 90 Day Fiance, whatever you want. So go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat box. And I'll give you a moment to collect your thoughts. Go ahead and So hi, Stephanie. Hi, Tony. Uh, Stephanie is from Creekside Middle School in Carmel, Indiana. Liz Wagner, she teaches at an alternative school called Renaissance on the east side of Indiana, 9th and 10th grade English.
No Zoom.
If whoever is speaking, if they wouldn't mind muting, that'd be great. And Liz has been including Holocaust literature for 13 years and recommend 13th on Netflix. Eye-opening for this white woman. Yes, 13th I think refers to the 13th Amendment, if I'm correct. So Stephanie is teaching social studies, 13 years. Mandy, world history, 9th grade. Holocaust for 11 years. And reading What Really Works with exceptional learners, great. Matt from Fishers High School, 10th grade and 11th grade, AP US History and US History, teaching the Holocaust for 12 years. So we have some very experienced people. That's fantastic. Matt is ethnic studies, US and world history, also at Fishers, teaching the Holocaust for 5 years. Beloved by Toni Morrison. I've actually read that book. We have Chris from Creekside Middle School, and she's been teaching, including the Holocaust, for 8 years. And she recommends the book Things Seen from Above. Okay, I'll have to check that out. Henry, a college student in anthropology. What a great topic that is. And he worked for the education of the Holocaust Museum Houston for 5 years and recommend The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes from the Hunger Games. Tony has taught and lectured about the Holocaust for 20 years. Wow, we have a real expert here. We're all like on a continuum of becoming experts. So I've been in this field, as I mentioned, I feel like I'm always learning. There's always new insights on this topic. Danielle, 4th grade, never taught the Holocaust and recommend The Amazing Race, very exciting. And we have Kelly, 7th grade in language arts, Holocaust for 6 years. Emily, English, Plainfield, taught the Holocaust for 12 years. Recommends the book All Boys Aren't Blue and the show Little Fires Everywhere on Hulu. Yeah, I want to check that one out. That sounds great. And Stephanie, Culver Academies, a boarding school, college advisor. I go around and tell Eva's story of forgiveness. Honestly, I've not had a break. Wow, I haven't seen any movies. Okay, wonderful. And I'll read a few more. Matt, nice to have you with us. Holocaust for 15 years. God, I'm going to be learning a lot from you guys today. So then we have Dr. C, which is Julia Carter, virtual instructor. So you're comfortable in this online space, teaching history, the Holocaust, 7 years. Okay. Let's see. Matt recommends Stamped. Also, When They See Us. I've heard about that. And Palm Springs, I just saw that. What a fun movie. And Ruth, American history, immigration history. Wonderful. That's terrific. Okay. So, and she recommends the book America for Americans, A History of Xenophobia in the United States. All right. Excellent. So I want to start by, if you have not yet introduced yourself, please do. And I hope that everybody will read your posts. And I'm going to move on because even though 3 hours is a long time for a virtual program, time sometimes flies by. So if you're new to Echoes and Reflections, and I have a feeling some of you have already participated previously, I just want to tell you just very briefly a little bit about our program. And What we do is we support middle and high school educators to teach their students about the Holocaust with accuracy, confidence, and impact. So if you're in elementary school, if you teach at the university level, you certainly can consider how you might adapt this material. And our content and resources are designed to help students learn about the Holocaust and encourage critical thinking about its meaning in their lives and in the world. So we want to, if I hear my little dog crying, this is Teddy, and I'm going to put him down, and you be a good boy, Teddy. Okay. So we want to encourage critical thinking, having students ask those sometimes very challenging questions. We've worked with more than 60,000 educators like yourself across the country, impacted more than 6 million students. We have 3 partners: the Anti-Defamation League, an organization founded more than 100 years ago. They fight anti-Semitism and other forms of bigotry in the United States and abroad. And they brought their expertise in curriculum design and professional development. Our other partner is the USC Shoah Foundation, founded by filmmaker Steven Spielberg after he made the film Schindler's List, to record interviews and testimonies of Holocaust survivors and other witnesses. He felt that they could be the educators of the future. So they contributed clips or excerpts of testimony, which are integrated throughout Echoes and Reflections. And our third partner is Yad Vashem. Some of you may have visited that institution. They're in Jerusalem, Israel. They are a memorial to the Jews murdered in the Holocaust. They're also a Holocaust museum. They have the largest repository of archival data and resources about the Holocaust in the world, with over 60 million documents and artifacts. So they brought their historical expertise and contributed many of the primary sources in Echoes and Reflections. So the focus of our session today is Choices Matter: Complicity and Action During the Holocaust. So as you know, the Holocaust could not have happened without the complicity of tens of thousands of individuals, as well as the cooperation of governments, and millions of people witnessed the crimes of the Holocaust, from small towns to large cities throughout Europe, in schools, in the workplace, and on the street. And the Nazis found countless individuals who collaborated and who were complicit in these crimes against humanities. And these included guards and bureaucrats, police, and many other people. And while we know the Holocaust has many examples of those who turned their back on their neighbors, we also know that there were some who chose another path to aid and even risk their lives to help others. And we will be exploring these roles throughout the session. So what are we going to do today specifically? So we're going to explore a sound pedagogy for planning and implementing Holocaust education in the classroom. And what do we mean by this? Of course, it's the roadmap. How do we navigate this complex topic in an effective and meaningful way? We'll also understand how the bystander and upstander roles manifest during the Holocaust, both so from the individual, civic, community, national, and international levels. We'll understand that the Holocaust was not inevitable, and it was the sum of a series of choices. And we're going to be looking at a model that shows the pattern of how hate escalates. will access tools and resources about the Holocaust through the lens of choice and acts of complicity. And at the end of this program, Amber is going to email you a list of all the resources that we are including in our session today. So all the URLs and where you could find everything so that you could access it, hopefully in your classroom. And even if you find one resource that you find valuable, I would say that would be a successful use of time. We'll also connect case studies on choice and complicity during the Holocaust to today and give suggestions on how to foster positive student actions in your schools and communities. So as you know, one of the reasons why we teach the Holocaust is that we want students to transfer what they learned about the Holocaust and apply it to their own lives. And we want to empower and inspire them to make a difference in the world today. And we also want to use Eva Core as a model to build connections throughout our time. So Amber mentioned a few things about the incredible Eva Core. Some might call her a force of nature. That's how I've come to see her. There are, she's was just an incredible, amazing person. So I'd like to take a moment and ask you in the chat box to just share what you know about Eva. As Amber said, she was really the inspiration and the founder of the Candles Museum. And that she was what was known as a Mengele twin, that she was one of about 3,000 people who were pulled aside for, the horrific experiments at Auschwitz. So what else do you know about her? What other impressions do you have about her? So go ahead and feel free to share something you know about her or what your impression is. So go ahead and put that information into the chat box. And Amber, you could participate too. So what else do you know about the incredible Eva Core? So you know what I noticed, and Amber, maybe you could answer this. She always seems to be dressed in this blue, which is so pretty on her. Was that somehow symbolic or had a special meaning? Maybe you could let us know.
Yeah, so we call it, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would just say we call it Eva Blue, and I had the opportunity to travel to Poland and Auschwitz with Eva this past summer in July. So unfortunately, I was with her when she passed. But there was an interesting experience when we were in Poland, or actually, Leah, I think it was when you and Jess went back, but we went to, or they went to the convent orphanage that she and her sister were placed in after liberation, and noticed that the nuns were wearing this bright blue. And so we wondered if maybe that subconsciously seeped in, and that just became her favorite color.
Yeah, it's very flattering. So let's see. So thank you for that story. So let's see what some people have said about Eva. Determined and strong. Absolutely. Thank you, Stephanie. And Liz says, I went on the 2016 summer tour and I took my students to different field trips to Candles. She forever changed my life and how I look at the world. She told us never give up and that all of us can change the world in some way, even if it's a little thing. Well, that fits exactly. That's our message today. So she really helped to solidify that very powerful message. Mandy said she met with a camp guard or something like and forgave him. So we're going to look at that toward the end of our time today. Ruth says the museum has an interesting video technology capturing her. It's sort of interactive, right? It is very interactive. I think it's called Dimensions in Testimony. It's a partnership with USC Shoah Foundation, where they filmed Eva over, I think, something like 4 or 5 days, where they asked her a battery of probably more than 1,000 questions, where students can come into a special theater, I think it's Candles, right? And ask her questions about her life. And through this amazing technology, she retrieves the answers to those questions. So it's goosebumps when you actually get to see it. So Candles is one of the first museums to really implement this new program and it's a game changer. So hats off to Candles for kind of taking that leap into the future and really in some way immortalizing. And if anybody should be on this program, it's Eva. So it's so great that you were able to capture her story in that way. Of course, there's documentaries about her testimony at the Shoah Foundation, or the exhibit, but there's nothing about interacting with the survivor. So that's wonderful. Tony says, met Eva in 1992, amazing woman, amazing message. Kelly said, she's a phenomenal speaker. She really pulls her audience in. Ruth, right, to Dimensions in Testimony. Danielle, I know that she forgave, deeply caring. Matt, I've read about her and her sister in a video, sharing a nice link. Met her in 2007, hosted my students, did lesson for her on for Eva Day. It's interesting, many Romanian and Hungarian pronounce their name Eva, so it's Eva though. You told me so. Okay. So anyway, excellent. A couple other things. So we know she passed away in 2019. She had a sister who was one of the twin, Miriam, who unfortunately passed away in 1993. She was from Romania. In 1995, she organized a trip with other twins to return to Auschwitz. And in 2005, that's when, on the 50th anniversary of liberation, that she actually had this declaration of forgiveness. And obviously the recipient of many awards and honorary doctorates. So what I'd like to do now is turn to another survivor. And we're going to come back to Eva's story a little bit later in the program. I want to introduce you to a survivor. His name is Philip Markowitz. And when I say introduce you to his video testimony. And we could find his interview actually on the website Eyewitness. And I have a feeling some of you may know Eyewitness. It is developed and managed by our partner, USC Shoah Foundation. This testimonies on Eyewitness are totally searchable. I'm going to go into his complete interview. Most people were interviewed, their interviews are about 2 to 2.5 hours in length. And what we did for Echoes and Reflections on our website, we sort of curated those clips by subject and made small excerpts that we put into the various lessons. But with Eyewitness, there's well over 2,000 testimonies, both clips and full-length testimonies. So they haven't made a clip yet of Philip Markowitz, but I think he's a remarkable person, as you're going to see in a minute. So he was actually born in Poland. He was in the Lodz ghetto, and he was later imprisoned in a number of camps, including Flossenburg and eventually Auschwitz-Birkenau extermination camp. In 1939, he was 14 years old. So in the clip that I'm going to play, it's just a couple minutes, he is going to describe for you being on a transport in a cattle car on a train, going from Auschwitz-Birkenau extermination camp to the Flossenburg concentration camp. And he's with his brother, Henry. So at this time, he is a teenager. So as you listen to this clip, I want to ask you to think about the message students might take away after watching this clip. And we are going to share that in a moment. So Math is saying eyewitness is a must, teaching about the Holocaust. So I'm going to switch my screen to eyewitness. Let's see. All right. So that's Eva Core. So if what you have to do with eyewitness, if you're not already registered, you have to register. I already registered. So I am going to put Mr. Markowitz name in the search box. So you see how this, oops, something went wrong. R-K-O, there he is, Philip Markowitz. Okay. All right, so then this is giving me access to his full testimony. I have to move my screens around. I'm going to click on it. It's going to come up. And here he is. So I am going to go to clip number 99. And if you ever want to play this, it'll be on that assets sheet. So just give me 1 second, a moment of grace as I pull it up. All right, clip number 99. This is the nice thing about eyewitness is you can jump around using the search function, and we see all of these index terms that align with his testimony. And I want to go to minute 10:28. All right. That's a little too far. All right. All right, so we're going to start it. So what is the message?
Distributed by the couples in there, but it
wasn't.
wasn't.
A second.
It was lucky we could grab a piece of bread, and then we were going in the train, and it was people died on the train, and it was a miracle happening to the train. I'd like to mention it because this actually saved our life. I had in Auschwitz made myself a piece of knife, not supposed to, and I hid it in my jacket, and I kept it with me so that to have it, and then I cut out.
How did you make a knife?
By not take a piece of iron, like a bend, and you bend back and forth and it breaks. I had a short piece, and then nobody could see it. A stone on a stone. I cut on the edge over and over, day in and day out, day in and day out. Sharpen it and knock it and chop it, just to have something to have it. And when I was in that train, there was openings that much, and on the bottom we're laying on the floor. And I kept cutting it because I was very good in wood cutting, just to have more air and to look out. And then a miracle happened. And somehow, on the train stopped on the side for a long, long time at night. And then at daybreak, a passenger train came by and then stopped right in front of me, a door to go down. And I saw people going down. I only could see their feet. I couldn't see anything else. I put my hand through, and somebody put a sandwich in my hand. And I grabbed it and put it back in place. I mean, without that sandwich, me and my brother Henry, it was bread with fat. I don't know what kind of fat it was smeared on. It could be goose fat or chicken fat, whatever it is. But we hit it hard right away. And me and my brother Henry survived because of that piece of bread. I wish I could find who did it. This person must have been an angel. I mean, sent from heaven to saved me, and I feel choked now from this, what happened. I mean, it was unbelievable such a thing should happen. And the reason I survived, there was a few things, like I mentioned before, the light bulb was gone. If the light bulb would be in the lodge, they would take us and we'd be gone. And there are certain things, moments in life, but I could see the miracle, the unusual thing.
Okay. So, so you can, if you'd like, actually speak. You can either answer in the chat box or whatever you prefer. Just put, if you want to unmute yourself, just put your name in the chat box and we'll call on you. But please, what do you think about this story, and what message do you think students take away from it? Give you a second to think about what message do we get from Phillips Markowitz's story? What do you think? I know it was a little bit low, so I apologize for that. That's a little hard to control. So, all right, so we have from Mandy, even a little thing matter. Liz says, how a small act can seem a miracle to someone else. Definitely a miracle, an angel, he said. And did you notice his body language? That he even today, so he gave his testimony maybe 20, 25 years ago, and 50 years later, he still talks about it and gets choked up about this. Definitely a miracle, an angel. Tony says there were people willing to help others during this horrible time. Stephanie said, agree with everyone. Hopeful, hope. Does anybody want to be brave enough and speak? Just put your name. I'd love to hear somebody talk. So Matt says, I think students feel tiny and at the mercy of much of the larger system. So it's empowering to know that small mercies combine to change lives. Sherry, another Sherry, how many people walked past that little hand and did nothing? And maybe they didn't even think about it. Who knows? Ruth says that people knew what was happening, that it wasn't a secret. That's a great insight. People knew that there were people on those trains. Absolutely. Any speakers? I want to encourage someone to speak. Matt, please unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. I was kind of thinking that the sandwich, I'd like my students to do a little more research to see how many of his family members this affected, because keeping him alive, how many generations did this save going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Who would think that he actually equated the sandwich, an everyday thing that we look at, I'm going to have a sandwich, as what saved his life? Why do you think it had that profound effect? What was it about that sandwich? What did the sandwich represent? What do you think? Anybody want to speak? Thank you, Matt, for being brave. Hope, says Tony. What else? What did that sandwich, why would a sandwich save his life? Sure, he was hungry. There's no question. Liz, please unmute yourself.
I would say that it's not just the hunger, but he's not alone. That somebody thought of him and knew what was going on and wanted to help.
That's right. I think, how do you, a number of you said hope and generosity. How do you know, how do you become hopeful when you feel like your life might have meaning, that it matters? You know, there was such dehumanization that people were meant to feel like their lives were meant nothing and that somebody would care enough. So yes, empathy, people cared. So, you know, this is really the message of how small deeds can have a profound effect. And someone had said early on that Eva had a similar message. And a small deed could seem like a miracle to a person, and that they could feel valued and could save a life. So I wanted to start us off thinking about the range of responses that individuals had during the Holocaust and how roles can change, sometimes instantly. You know, that person, when they woke up that morning, did they go out and plan to help someone? But the moment presented themselves, and that person moved from being a bystander to being an upstander. And everybody has the capacity to be an upstander. And sometimes you don't always have to risk your life to be an upstander. It could be a small act of kindness and compassion, as it did in this time. So before we move on to the next thing, so this was our first clip of testimony, okay? And, you know, we're gonna look at different primary sources, but testimony has its own unique qualities. And having worked at the Show Foundation, and I was there for almost 18 years, I looked at so many testimonies, and I thought about, you know, what is the nature about testimony? How is it different from other primary sources that you might use? So what can you say about describing what testimony is? And maybe how is it different than maybe a diary? Many of you and your students, we're all familiar with Anne Frank's diary. That's a first person account, just like somebody's testimony. So feel free to put your name in the chat box or text, or not text, chat. What you think, how would you describe what a testimony is, or how might it be similar or different to a diary? So now we're looking at this resource. So go ahead and consider that question. It's telling the story. Telling your story. That's very important that you put the word yours in. He is telling his personal story. Okay. Thank you, Deb. Ruth is saying it's also apparent that this child undertook responsibility. Let me just minimize this so I can see for his brother. Yes, which is a burden, which is also, of course, calls to mind their parents, who are there in this scene in the absence. Oh, that's so interesting when he talks about caring for his brother. Yes, we learn about relationships to each other. J. Henry, different forms of testimony allow us to see the person's body language and hear the inflection of his voice. Right. So a diary, we don't always see that. And that moment where he just closes his eyes and talks about he goes, it was unbelievable. There are even hard words to describe what he's talking about. His smile. So we get to see the faces, hear the voices, hear the inflection. Yes. Appeals to the visual and verbal learners. Excellent, Matt. Yeah, Dr. C. Yes, his smile, and he describes the angel, Tony, a way to provide evidence of proof of an event. Testimony is for others, a diary is for yourself. That's a great insight. I really like that. I also think testimony puts a face on the words, makes it real. So he was a similar age when this happened. So there's also like layers here, and it's memory. So a diary is often written in real time. And this is with reflection over 50 years. He's not only remembering his thought, but sometimes could add new ideas or insights or connect it to what's happening in the world today. So it's very, what I like to say, layered. So when you use a testimony in your classroom, you might want to show a clip more than one time. You want students to pay attention to the content of what the person is saying, you know, what is the messages, and it's good to give them a focusing question, and also the body language and the tone and the intonation, which kind of gives you more of the emotional side of history. and events. So you can continue to think about that as we move forward, and we're going to look at a couple more clips throughout. So the next thing before we continue back into the content is our pedagogical principles. And I would be very thrilled to hear more people speak, so I encourage that. So the three partners got together, and it's hard with three, and said, you know, what is important to keep in mind when teaching this complex topic? How do we do it in a way that's meaningful, that's respectful, that takes into account students' emotions? This is traumatic content sometimes. How do we present it? What are things we should think about when presenting this topic? So what are some of the things you do or keep in mind in order to present this topic? So some of you teach it through the book use of literature. Some of you are history, social studies teachers. What are some things that you do to present this? What are your guidelines, or what's important? And if you haven't taught it, what do you, when you're teaching a historical event, what kinds of materials do you use? What do you think? So go ahead and think about that, and you could add your thoughts in the chat, or feel free to put your name in, and I would be thrilled to call on you. What are things you keep in mind when teaching this topic? Mandy, please.
So one of the things we talk about is how the Holocaust and other events like this kind of happen step by step, and not just overnight. And so sometimes it's hard to see the things that lead up to an event like this one.
Great, great. Okay. That kind of, how does this history unfold? Right. And sometimes, you know, students walk away with, like, they kind of know, well, there were ghettos and camps, but they don't kind of know, like, well, how did we get to that point? But so kind of like showing the different steps and the progression can be very useful, right? Liz says, I found teaching the background history first helps since some students are unaware of this time in history. So when you say, so I guess that means, and I'm not sure, tell me if I'm not right, like you give some of the context, the background. So that's important. Dr. C says, we have an interesting assignment where the students choose an artifact and discuss what it means to them. There are baby shoes, prisoner uniforms, Jewish stars, etc. So, and Tony's saying, tell people's story, make it personal. So one of the guidelines, and I think this speaks to those two comments, is we call it kind of teaching the human story. So teach it from the perspective of how were individuals affected. So we know, let's say in many cases, Elie Wiesel's story, we know Anne Frank's story. Well, there were many other, how do we bring it down to that individual level? And, you know, research shows that students remember stories. So Tony says, tell people story, make it, we remember stories. So if we can teach history and use stories kind of as helper us, that may make this content, so to speak, a little more sticky, or that people will remember it more. Yes, Liz says, yes, context. How did we get to the camps? Right. Usually introduced, Matthew says, usually introduced with secondary sources. So we love primary sources. You know, they really give multiple perspectives, you know, allows us to use all of our senses when we're listening, when we're looking, when we're exploring. But secondary sources are also very important. We want to use maps. We need those summaries that tell us, you know, how, you know, what were the impact of what happened. Dr. C, I also provide the examples of how Jews were treated even in the Middle Ages. I've seen the gates which lock the Jewish quarter at night in walled French cities. So how Jews were treated. So you want to give some information on the history of anti-Semitism. which was such a driving force in what allowed the Holocaust to happen. So in some way, if you have a lot of time, you want to go into the broad history, and we have a lot of resources for that, but you want to touch upon the role anti-Semitism played. So Matt also emphasized not just the humanity of the victims, but also perpetrators. Real humans are capable of horrible things, and we have to interrogate what is inside of all humans that allows us to do things to people. So I think, you're really speaking to the essence of this, Matt, and I wouldn't mind if you want to talk about it. Yeah, there's so many roles that people say, and we see kind of the extremes of behavior from people, as Matt said, who were capable of terrible things, even unspeakable. Even when we listen to survivors tell their story, they struggle for the words because it's so horrific and sometimes. And then on the other end of the spectrum, people capable of tremendous humanity beyond what we could even think of. So we see kind of how a look into human behavior and what makes us human. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and add a couple of things to what you said. We have in that assets document we're going to send you, you're going to get a list of things to keep in mind. And I imagine most of you do these things, but it's a good reminder when you kind of tackle a topic like this. So I would say you want to spend time defining terms. So and I know this isn't obvious, you want to go even beyond defining what is the Holocaust. But really even look at, what is a bystander? What is a perpetrator? What's the difference between what is a collaborator? And we have a glossary in Echoes and Reflections that help you with that. Someone mentioned provide background on the history of anti-Semitism. We talked about contextualizing the history. Teach the human story, where we translate statistics into personal stories. How did people maintain their identity? How did families deal with the world as it became increasingly chaotic? How did they approach decisions and dilemmas? That goes to the behavior that some of you mentioned. It was often the mother who had to make choices on how to divide the food in a family when everybody was hungry. And how did people return to life afterwards? And testimony can be very helpful. We talked about the use of primary sources. It allows students to interpret. And that's what I also like about testimony. We're kind of like interpreting for ourselves the meaning. When survivors told their stories, and when Eva spoke and told her story, in a way she was trying to make sense of her experience by sharing it with you. And then we, as viewers to that stories and listeners, also make sense and connect it with our own experience. So those primary sources can allow us to kind of see the patterns in history and the trends, and construct knowledge and draw conclusions. We want to make the Holocaust relevant whenever possible. Like, here's an event that happened 75 years ago. Why are we still teaching the Holocaust? Well, it's because we're connecting it to students' own lives and their role and responsibility. I mean, students in middle school and high school are thinking about their own identity, who they are, what they stand for, and also what's happening in the world. We could draw many connections between the unique history of the Holocaust and what's happening. We want to encourage inquiry-based learning and critical thinking. Anytime students can come up with their own questions, then they may be more invested and engaged. And many questions don't have answers. And the last two things is we want to foster empathy. And we talk so much about empathy. And I think nothing about like hearing from a eyewitness like Eva builds that empathy. But I would say we really even want to not only build empathy, but encourage and build compassion. You know, we want it to translate into students' behavior. And the last is ensure a supportive learning environment. Guide students, as we say, safely in and safely out. What does that mean? This will be our last question before we're going to take a quick break, but at a little stretch. But what does safely in and safely out mean? You may have heard that term, but what do you think it means? Anybody want to put their name in the chat box? Or feel free to add a comment. Safely in and safely out. Ruth, are you still looking? Oh, yeah. I didn't put another slide up. I don't have another slide till our break slide. So it's just a conversation. All of these things will be on a handout, and you will get that list at the end. So
it just sounded like you, when you said, and lastly, it sounded like you were going through bullet points. It sounded like you were looking at a different slide.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So what does it say? So safely in, safely out. So let me just give you, so some teachers use a lot of graphic images, for example. And these images, we've seen them where the bodies are kind of stacked up like wood, cords of wood. So these often were taken by the perpetrators to kind of, in a way, humiliate the victims. And they're, but we want to kind of look at the victim. So instead of using those graphic images, which could, and sometimes traumatize students or shut them down, we don't want to have that effect. We want to have the opposite effect. So we don't want to alienate our students. So we want to be sensitive. Doesn't mean we want to shy away from the content, but we want to think about the images that we show to them, and also to let them know that people did survive and that people went on to build their lives after. I mean, Eva Core is a perfect example of that. She went on, she decided to have a family, to become really an activist in life with a very strong message. So we want to make them feel comfortable in this environment as much as possible. So at this point, we've been on approximately an hour. We finished our first of our 3 hours. I'd like to say, let's take a 10-minute stretch and come back. I think right now it's about in about 10 minutes from now, and we will pick up. I think it's very important to get up, walk around, and then we'll get right back into the content. So 10 minutes. Okay, Daddy. Okay, we'll give everybody 1 more minute to get back, and we will start our second hour. I know it's lunchtime, so if you could feel free to have your lunch with us. Okay, so I think we're going to get back. So there were just a couple comments just before the break about that safely in and safely out, about be supportive of every student, be mindful of their circumstance. Dr. C, we need to be aware of the traumas our own students may have experienced and the triggers with their images. So, you know, I'm always surprised at kind of the emotional connections that people make with this material and how it touches them so personally. And I think one of the reasons is that we share very personal material. When we listen to survivors, they share the most intimate details of their life. And that kind of touches us where we become more vulnerable. And I think that's what happens. And in a way, that opens us up to kind of a different type of learning, and that can be very powerful. So Ruth is mentioning the Dr. Ruth movie on Hulu. I saw it. Ruth, it was excellent. She's also a kick, as you know. I think 94, 95, going strong, sharp as a tack. And she talks about survivors going on to live their lives. She was a survivor of what was known as the kinder transport, where parents put their children on trains to go to England and other places where families could take care of them during the war, and most were not very few were reunited. And it was, it did save a lot of lives. The experience of those children were quite varied. Some were treated well, some not so well. But anyway, she had a very positive experience. I think that helped her in her life. So moving on. So I don't know if any of you know Dr. Michael Berenbaum. He is an historian. He was the president of the Shoah Foundation for a while. Very smart. He's the kind of person that when you listen to, like, the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. He's just so articulate. And so I wanted to kind of start a little bit with Kristallnacht. And Dr. Michael Berenbaum says about Kristallnacht, it was the end of the beginning and the beginning of the end. It was a critical juncture in when the events went from bad to worse. And this quote is from a testimony we have in Echoes and Reflections. If you know Echoes and Reflections and you know Lesson 1, you may know Kurt Messerschmidt. And he is a survivor from Germany. He became a teacher when he came to the United States. And he says, some of the people disapproved, but their disapproval was only silence. And silence is what did the harm. And in a moment, we're going to watch Kurt's testimony, where he recalls his memory from 1938 during the Kristallnacht pogrom. But before we do that, in order to add a little context around this, because we may have some people who are a little bit new to this, I know we have some very experienced people, so I especially want to hear from them. What do you know about Kristallnacht? And who would like to unmute themselves and tell us a little bit about what they know about this pogrom, when it was, where it was, what happened, what might have instigated it. What do you know about Kristallnacht? Who's going to put their name in? Who's brave? Not even brave. I know, if you're a teacher, you're used to talking. So go ahead and put your name down or feel free to chat. What do you know about the Kristallnacht pogrom before we listen to Kurt's testimony? I know we have a lot of experienced people. So I want to encourage you to be as actively engaged as possible. It will make our time more interesting together. Jay Henry says the destruction of Jewish-owned shops and synagogues throughout Germany. Okay. It also was in parts of Austria and Czechoslovakia. It's also called, Kristallnacht is the German word for night of broken glass. Many Jewish buildings were destroyed. Right? Okay. What else?
So I bring it up in the context of when I'm teaching U.S. history of the Neutrality Acts and how the United States had passed these Neutrality Acts and how they seemed to signal that the U.S. was going to be hands off what was happening in Europe in this case.
Wow. So thank you for giving us the perspective from the U.S. point of view. That's important. I don't know, did you have a chance to visit the United States Holocaust Museum, relatively new exhibit about, what the Americans knew during the Holocaust? It's really tremendous. So Liz, was that Liz that we just heard?
No, that was Ruth.
Okay, Liz.
One of the things that I bring up with Kristallnacht with my students is that it was really the first outright time of violence against the Jewish people. There were a lot of things leading up to it with curfews and laws and such, but this was the first time of violence. I'm seeing a lot of people say the destruction of businesses and buildings, but there were also murders and 1,000 arrests of Jewish men that night as well.
Yeah, there were, and completely legal. So that's interesting. And so thank you for that comment. Yes. Tony says attack on synagogues and based on a false claim that a German officer had been attacked by a Jewish citizen. Well, there was a case where a young teenage boy, his parents were Polish, living in Germany, and they were deported back to Poland, but Poland didn't take them in. They were kind of in this nowhere's land. And because of how his parents were treated, his name was Herschel Greensberg. He walked into the German embassy, I think in Paris, if that's right. Please correct me if I'm not giving you the 100% accurate, and shot a diplomat, a German diplomat, who ended up dying. And, you know, this was a terrible thing that he did, but that was used as the match to ignite this pogrom, or the excuse. Is there anything else anybody wants to share? I also, Risa says, I refer to Kristallnacht when we cover the ship to St. Louis, where we're talking about American refugee policy in my immigration courses. Yeah, that's a wonderful example of how people behaved. It's a fascinating story. There's a film about it. I think it's called The Ship of Fools, maybe. But that's a really powerful story. So thanks for mentioning it. So just to add to what everybody says, the Kristallnacht pogrom happened on November 9th and 10th in 1938. And there were many people arrested, murdered, taken away, synagogues burned. Matt says the liquidation of Judaism also resulted in massive property seizure. Yes, yes. So I'd like to play for you. Go to the next slide. Here's our friend Kurt. I'm going, again, his testimony will be linked on that assets sheet. So there's a couple things to listen for as we watch titled Voyage of the Damned. Yes, yeah. So when you listen to Kurt, there's a few things to keep in mind. So think about the various roles that in Kurt's story that people played. So for example, who is the victim? Who are the bystanders? Who are the perpetrators? And who are the upstanders? So let's, okay, oops. So consider that. And we will look at that right after we listen to Kurt. So I'm going to click, I embedded it. Should play.
And that measurements would be taken.
Hold on, let's start from the beginning.
In 1938, it's one of those dates which I can never forget, and we all don't forget it. When November 10th every year comes around, I'm the one who remembers this day vividly, while even my non-American friends, American Jewish friends, don't remember it unless they read finally about it. This was the so-called Kristallnacht. That night, I listened to the radio, forbidden, BBC, the night before, and read all about what had happened in Paris, and that measurements would be taken to avenge the death of this Herrn vom Rath, killed by a Jewish boy. I listened to the radio in a friend's house, and I rushed home. Woke up the next morning.
my transportation to school was about 7 miles, was by bicycle. I was fortunate at that point, I still was allowed to have a bicycle. All these things were taken away later. I went through all these things, we lost everything. But on bicycle, I went through 7 miles of glass splinters. It's amazing that the bicycle lasted. And my dear colleague, Uri Sonnenfeld, who was the main sports coach, was still there, and we sat there for a moment, deciding what to do. But there was no question. We took our bicycles and made a tour of the whole city of Berlin. We came to Friedrichstraße, it's a well-known term now. There was a little, very tiny cigar shop. The owner was a very, very old man, tiny old gentleman. But there were people standing around, 40, 50 people. And 2 of the Sturmabteilung, the SA, not SS. SS are the one in the black uniforms, and these are the brown shirts. Of course, with all their equipment, and they forced this very old gentleman to pick up the tiny glass splitters one by one. And they forced this man to do this. And they all were standing there and watching. We didn't know what to think. The only thing we could think of was help. So we put our bicycles down. Rudy and I, we went in front of that group that was surrounding this old gentleman, went down on our knees, and started picking up glass splitters one by one to help this man. Briefly, I looked at the 2 guys. They didn't blink. They didn't move. Why did they not move? I asked myself. Are they afraid that the people might agree with us or not? I've never figured out what it was. But I'm sure in this particular situation that some of the people standing there disapproved of what the Nazis did. But their disapproval was only silence. And silence is what did the harm.
All right. Let's go back. All right. So here are a few questions. The actors in the testimony. Who were the victims, perpetrators, bystanders, and upstanders? Who would like to put their name in the chat box and go through that list? Or would you prefer maybe I call on someone? Who would like to share with us? Who are the different actors in this? And some of these things that we do is really to model how you might unpack this with your students. Who are the different actors? Who would like to respond? Oops, slipped ahead. Who were the different actors? Who were the victims in this? Henry, thank you for volunteering. Go through our list.
So Can I say something first before going through the whole list?
Of course.
So I'd say that Kurt and his friend were both victims and upstanders because they showed their disapproval of what the two, who were they, the SA men were, who were the perpetrators, were doing to the man who owned the shop. And all the people who were standing there who were watching were the bystanders.
Beautiful.
So I think I went through the list. But
Yeah. Great.
Okay.
Excellent. And I like how you put Kurt and his friend Rudy in that two-part in dual roles. In the particular story, they were more of the upstand. That poor man, the cigar shop owner, was definitely the victim in this particular story. But in general, you're 100% right. So, okay. Any other questions here that somebody would like to respond to? Like, what choices did individuals make? Choices who made the choices here? How does Kurt describe the people he saw watching, and why, or why didn't they react? Liz, thank you.
I would like to talk about the last one. What do you think compels Kurt and Rudy to act? Because I've actually used this clip with my students, and they, most of them say it's because they saw an older man who, we think of our elderly as weaker, and that we need to respect and help them. But what they also pointed out that I did not think of, because I guess because I'm older and they're still teens, is the fact that Kurt is telling this story as an old man. So he was a teen at the time, but now he is that what they could see a little old man that they would want to help. So they kind of made that, and I've never even noticed that, but they made that connection there that he's telling the story as an older man.
So therefore he might connect more with that story. That's a beautiful example of how we interpret meaning in a testimony. So I never thought of that insight before, but I could totally see how students could make that connection. And so, we all think, students sometimes say, oh, I would never be a bystander. I would act. They like to imagine themselves in these. And, I don't think anybody would ever know how they would act in these situations. It's impossible to put yourself in the place at the time, with everything with all the complexity, to put yourself in those places. But I think what we do in a clip like this is that we raise the questions, if more than anything. Were the people, and we could imagine, were people in shock when they looked at this, where maybe some of them didn't know what to do. There was a lot of fear around retaliation. Maybe if I speak up or I object, I would be arrested. And I have a family and children to take care of. So while we know most people didn't act, there's also reasons why that may not have happened. I would have hoped that more people could have. And when you ask people who did stand up, they would say, I felt I didn't have a choice. It wasn't even that much of a consideration. But what I like in this clip, again, is the questions that are raised. So moving on.
I think Matt.
Yes. I'm sorry.
Matt wanted to say something.
Oh, please. Thank you. Thank you for. Yes.
Yeah. I just wanted to jump in because I know it definitely is hard for us to put ourselves in the shoes of the people who were there. But when we talk about bystanders, I know in my classroom, I ask my students to just brainstorm a list of injustices in America today. And then once we get this big list up on the board, I just ask them what they're doing about any of those things. And usually it's nothing. And so I ask, like, Are you complicit in these things? Like, what responsibility do we have? Are you being a bystander right now for these injustices? And it makes it a lot easier for them to kind of grasp this whole idea, because we're bystanders for stuff all the time. It's just harder to, if you just think about the Holocaust, and it's harder to conceptualize it.
Right. I like how you bring it to their own lives. And, that the point about this small things can make a big difference. That's really Eva's point, and Philip Markowitz. You don't have to be, save a whole generation, but start with one thing at a time. So some of you may be familiar with this. It's called the Pyramid of Hate. It's really an iconic tool. It was developed originally by the Anti-Defamation League, one of the partners in Echoes and Reflections. We included in Echoes and Reflections. And as you look at this pyramid, think about what you heard in Kurt Messerschmidt's testimony and in his story. And what this pyramid does, it illustrates the prevalence of hate, bias, and oppression in society. And it's organized in escalating levels of attitudes and behaviors that really grow in complexity from the bottom to the top. And like a pyramid, the upper levels are supported by the lower levels. And the bias attitudes in each level, it negatively impacts individuals, it impacts institutions, society, and it becomes increasingly more challenging to dismantle the behaviors as they escalate. And with every bias, attitude, or act, it doesn't necessarily lead to genocide. We know that, and that's a very important thing to mention. Not everything escalates in that way. But each genocide that we look at has been built on the acceptance and the attitudes and actions described at the lower level of this pyramid. And when we challenge these bias attitudes and behaviors ourselves and in others and in institutions, we have a chance to potentially interrupt the escalation and make it more difficult for the discrimination and the hate to flourish. And that's what we hope students will do. So before Kristallnacht in 1938, the Jewish community experienced, as we know, a multitude of biased attitudes, which progressed over time. They were scapegoated. There was non-inclusive language. And many of you know about the anti-Jewish policies that began when the Nazis came to power in 1933 and continued to progress with the enactment of the Nuremberg laws in 1935. Which added more and more decrees over time. And these laws, the Nuremberg laws, may know, were defined Jews by blood. So that was really a change, and ordered the total separation of so-called Aryans and non-Aryans, and it legalized this racial hierarchy and made acts of discrimination legal. So for example, Jews, they couldn't own land, even a phone or a driver's license. Marrying, Kurt mentioned about you couldn't own a radio. Marrying non-Jews was declared a criminal act. Eventually, Jews were ordered to close businesses. Jewish students couldn't go to school. And as it was mentioned, the Kristallnacht program, we saw many people, houses of worship destroyed at like 1,000, and all of that damage was legal. So let's see, any comments before we move on? I want to show you a clip of Eva Core's testimony, and my little doggy is crying, so let's go down, Teddy. Any comments? Matt.
One thing too, if you want to bring in a class, I teach psychology also. So I bring up the Milgram experiment because this whole premise was the Germans were different, and that's why they were complicit in this. So even if show a clip of that, because basically it's a, what level people would shock people if an authority figure was there.
Yeah, maybe you could explain that just a little bit so we know what you're talking about. Would you take a second?
Yeah, so Stanley Milgram did an experiment, and his whole premise was that the German people were different. That's why the bystanders, this complicit, didn't speak up. So what he did was he had basically people in lab coats, and then they had it's a little complicated, but they had someone behind a wall that they were supposedly giving. They had a shock generator, and they would give them a level of shock if they didn't get a certain word pairing right. There was certain memorization they were supposed to have done, and it went to 450 volts.
Wow.
And his initial thing was that 5 to 10% of people might go that, if not zero, because Americans are better than that. And it wound up 80% of the people wound up going to 450 volts because an authority figure was telling them to keep going every time they questioned what was going on.
Wow.
So that's his work, and then Phil Zimbardo with taking on roles with the Stanford prison experiment. Both of those, if you're trying to just add something in there or what, just human nature in general.
You're the one who teaches psychology, correct?
I have, yeah.
Okay. It's interesting, the more that they moved people away from the actual killing, the easier it was to conduct it and spread and expand it. So in the beginning, we had, the Einsatz grouping, the mobile killing squad, but the psychological toll that played on people, and they were very drunk most of the time when they did it, was just too hard. So that was kind of one of the ideas of moving things, bring the people to the killing centers rather than bring the killers to the people, to have a little bit more of a disconnection there for psychological reasons. So anyway, so let's look. I want to go back to eyewitness. Let's see if I hit escape. Here's our friend Eva Core. Let me just escape and go back to, let's see, eyewitness. And I'm going to go to look up Eva Core. I'm so glad that oops, it doesn't like when I do this. Let's look at her testimony. So this was done like 25 years ago. But it's interesting to hear like how she tells her story 25 years ago and how she might tell it in the dimensions of testimony. And sometimes it's word for word, could be word for word, and sometimes it could be a little different. So let's see, here we go. So I am going to go to clip number 2. So what I would like, and I'll go back to the pyramid, to think about what level we would put her story in the pyramid. And in this, she describes being in school in her hometown in Romania. So I need to go to 1140. So let's move it to 1140. So by the way, Eyewitness has a video editor, so you can actually make your own clips. So let's listen to Eva Core's story.
The books in school were filled with hatred against Jews. One of the math problems that I clearly remember, it said, when you have 5 Jews and you kill 3, how many are left? And the reason that is important to illustrate, for people to understand that everything surrounding the hatred and destruction of the Jews was part of everyday life. It wasn't just one little place. There was no place for us to go. Now, I think that living in this, we still went to school. We tried to stay out of trouble, but we got spit on, we got pushed around. And of course, we couldn't go home to mother and complain, or to father, because that didn't help either.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. All right. All right. So this was her experience in school where would you put it on the pyramid of hate? And by the way, we have lots of testimony clips and echoes and reflections. You could have students listen to those testimony clips and put them throughout the pyramid, and then ask them to defend why they put them in those places. So acts of bias, absolutely could be there. And you know, these lines, they're a little blurry. They're not exactly fixed spaces. So some might say, well, maybe it's bias attitudes. Is it acts of bias? Is it discrimination? Violence. It definitely led to violence. So it's interesting to see, you know, where people would put it and why they would put it. Assault, top. Okay, definitely. We could look at it that way. And what's interesting is how teachers responded. And just as we have such a range of teachers and their attitudes today, you know, some teachers were very sensitive to their Jewish students before they were expelled from schools, and tried to make them comfortable, even though they were told to, you know, ignore them, but or even worse, or ridicule them. But some were very compassionate. And in Germany, teachers were expected and required to join the Nazi Party. So, hold on. My little dog is crying. Teddy, go out. Here. Go out, little fella. My little friend. Okay. So one point I wanted to mention, is about connecting. By the way, any comments on Eva Core's story? Anything you want to say about the pyramid of hate? Feel free to add that to the chat box or put your name in the chat box. So one quick note to keep in mind, that we want to make sure we're not comparing bullying to the Holocaust. And we have an excellent article about this on our website. And you know, throughout the years, I've heard many, you know, excellent teachers say they teach about the Holocaust to prevent students from enacting these behaviors. But we want to just be a little careful about oversimplifying that a little bit too much. And studying the Holocaust can certainly help students consider the consequences of their actions and inactions in situations, including bullying. But bullying prevention should never be the main purpose of Holocaust education. Holocaust education certainly brings up important topics like propaganda, which was used by the Nazis. However, bullying was not the goal, nor the reason for the Holocaust. And individuals certainly had choices whenever to stand up for their neighbors. And history shows, as we said, that most did not. And whether that was out of fear, conformity, ideology, others took advantage of the circumstances. And studying the Holocaust can help students to develop the skills needed to examine the effects of stereotyping, prejudice, and bigotry, which can help them consider their own behaviors. So both topics are important. The Nazis did bully people, but it wasn't their main goal. And so we want to do justice to both. So just something to keep in mind. So some of you may be familiar with this quote. It's by the Reverend Martin Niemöller, and it's a poem about the dangers of indifference. And Reverend Niemöller is an interesting character. This certainly speaks to the dangers of anti-Semitism, but he actually started out as an anti-Semite, but over time kind of changed his thinking. And we have seen this poem in many iterations, and I think it's, you know, terrific. I'm so glad that we include it in Echoes. So I'm just going to read it out loud. First, they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. So I'd like to ask you to consider this question and put your responses in the chat box or your name. How does this poem connect with Kurt and Eva's testimony and the Pyramid of Hate? How do you see these different things connecting? Yes, there's a book called Terrible Things that I believe is based on the poem. And that's, I think, a children's book. And you could even use it with high school seniors. And it's a wonderful resource. So thanks for mentioning that. Oh, someone lost sound. Can you hear me? Everybody else? Yeah, just shake your head. Okay, good. So how does this poem connect with the Pyramid of Hate to Eva? How would you say? Maybe someone who hasn't spoken would like to put their name into, or just reactions to this poem. The escalation of discriminatory practices. It does. Similar. Okay. It shows that this was allowed to happen because of many people's choices. Great. Sherry.
I'm not sure how much it fits on the pyramid exactly, though, because it's not an increasing act of violence. It doesn't speak on that anyway. You know, it just came for different people groups. But the way it's written, I kind of assume whatever happened to that people group was the same. Whereas on the pyramid, it's definitely more violent at the top.
Right. We see more and more groups kind of included. Right. It may be an expansion, but don't know about the but first they came for. So like we have to interpret what came for means. And that means that people are being arrested. We don't know. But it sounds like they were there one day and then not there the next day. So it doesn't, it could be already escalated to a certain point, but we don't know. We have to interpret that.
It's almost like we could assume that whatever happens to them, can we assume it's on the same level in the pyramid?
It could. We don't know. You know what? If it raises questions, I think that's a very good thing. Liz says, Kirk spoke of silence being just as harmful as the actions of Kristallnacht. Yes. And Dr. C, the dangers of being silent is that eventually the powerful will choose you and your group, right? Whenever we see an injustice, we can't remain quiet. We must speak up, Stephanie says. And Matt, I thought of this poem as soon as we watched the testimony of Kurt. Brilliant minds. The bystanders could eventually become victims depending on the status and the situation. Right. So once I think the universal message is like, if one group is being attacked, and I think Kurt might, in some way in his story, even very implicitly, then nobody is safe. Who's to say where this will end? Once it becomes normalized or it's okay and people don't stop it, the possibilities of it can expand. So I think also, Matt, please.
I was just going to say that it reminds me of Dr. King's quote that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, because if you have a society where you allow dehumanization, then that's a weapon that can be turned against anybody. And so that's why you have to stand up against all forms of dehumanization. Yeah.
And anybody else use this poem in their classroom? I think it's something that students can really connect with. And I've seen people tell me like students write their own poems based on this. It's almost like a repetition that we could substitute different groups depending on the time. So I think it's a good conversation starter. Okay. So here's a couple of questions. So what is the cost when an individual does not act to interrupt justice? What is the harm to the victim? What is this harm to society as a whole? Who would like to, you could answer one or both questions. Who would like to respond? Some of this we already talked about. Any thoughts? What is the harm? Just, and I love that statement. Whenever I think of the harm, I always think of Kurt's words. Silence is what did the harm. So you almost like, you don't even have to be the perpetrator, just the silence is enough. Okay, let's go to Matt. Is this for this? Did you want to speak now?
No, that was from last time.
Okay, good. Okay. Tony, please. Yes, Tony.
For the first part, the injustice then becomes the norm. It's allowed to happen over and over again.
Exactly. Great. Perfect. Liz, would you like to add to that?
Yes, for the second one, what's the harm to the victims? Made me think of the first clip that we watched with Philip and his little hand sticking out and getting the sandwich, and how that's what he attributes to saving his life, was that hope and feeling that he wasn't alone. So I would say the harm to the victims of staying silent is that you are isolating them and continuing to make them feel like there is no hope.
Thank you, Mandy. She's saying she appreciates these questions. All right, moving on. Okay, we are going to do a quick breakout group. It's a photographic activity. We want to break you into 3 different breakout groups randomly. And it'll be breakout group number 1, breakout group number 2, and breakout group number 3. And each group will be assigned a different photograph to look at. Okay, and these are the questions I would like you to consider when we look at the photographs. What are the details? How do they stand out? What do you think is going on? What do you wonder? What broader questions does it raise? So these are just very general questions. And the photographs that we're going to share with you, oops, that's one of them, come from either Echoes and Reflections, or they come from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, who partners with us on content from an exhibit, and they have it online, called Some Were Neighbors. Oops, trying to pull down my box. Here it goes. Into breakout rooms. So let's see, I'm going to assign you into 3 breakout rooms. Let's see. And then what we need you to do, the chat box will remain open while you're in the breakout room. So if you're in breakout group number 1, you will look at, you need to copy that link, and you could open another window or use it on another device, and choose one person in your group who will be your speaker, and report back what the group thinks of these questions. So let's give it a try. I'm not 100% it's going to work. If not, we'll come back as a full group and discuss these photos. But once you're in your group, we're going to give you about 5 minutes to examine your photograph, and then let's see if this is going to work. So I'm going to create the breakout groups. I will jump in and tell you, if it doesn't say you're in breakout room number 1, I'll tell you what room you're in, because I could jump into your room. So you're going to appear in your room. There'll be about 5 people in each room. Okay, so I'm actually going to read who's in the room. So Amber, Sherry, Leah, Ruth, and Stephanie are in breakout room 1. Breakout 2 is Dr. C, Liz, Mandy, Matt, and Matthew. And breakout room is number 3 is Jay Henry, Kelly, Matt, Stephanie, and Tony. So I'm going to open the rooms, and hopefully you're going to be able to open these links.
Hello, Sherry.
Hi.
Did I go the right place?
You did. You did. I feel like we're missing a couple participants, but that's all right. Just go. There's Ruth.
Okay.
And then,
I
Okay.
didn't know I had to click something else.
all right.
It's
Okay.
technology. I hope it's going to work. Did everybody pull up the image?
Yes.
Okay, great.
I didn't. I don't know where it is.
Oh, it's in the chat.
In the chat. Okay.
Yes. Under group 1.
Gotcha.
You'll see a link. So I know we're supposed to do.
Okay. What do you see?
Yes.
What do you think is going on? What does it make you wonder? What broader questions does it raise?
So what do we see in this image?
This is the complete destruction of a synagogue. Flames coming through the top of the building.
You see all these people watching. Looks like some of them may be important. They have different types of hats on that may look, I don't know, maybe police-ish.
And I don't see anybody really doing anything about it.
No.
That's the first thing that.
Yeah, you don't see like a fire truck or water buckets or anything.
Any kind of water hose or something at all.
Right. They're all standing back and just viewing the act, not taking any sort of role.
So that may go into our further questions.
Thank you.
Why isn't anybody?
Right. So I wonder who in the crowd, there might be people in the crowd who are members of that synagogue.
Do we have a year? Would we know?
38.
1938. So this is
Kristallnacht. This is Kristallnacht.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I was only halfway listening. But yes, I think
you have a museum to run, Leah. Sorry.
I think in 1938 you would definitely have people in the crowd that could be members of this temple.
Mm-hmm.
So in some of the places where synagogues were destroyed, sometimes people were able to remove the Torah before.
Mm-hmm. So wondering if something similar happened to this particular temple.
Yeah.
Or what else they're losing besides just the building.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So removing, the fact that this has a title underneath it that says the Horowitz Synagogue, how would you know this was a synagogue?
Well, if you had the year and that it was in Germany, that would be a good guess. Because so many synagogues were destroyed in November 1938.
Mm-hmm.
Does the parapet or whatever that would be called on top mean anything? I can't make the picture bigger, so.
I don't think so.
We're running out of time. That freaks me out.
So the broader questions, what are the broader questions?
Well, I think one thing Stephanie said is why is everyone just standing around why are they not trying to intervene in any particular fashion.
It makes me wonder what else, like if we could pan around, what other buildings are also burning at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Or if this is the only one and everything else is untouched. All right, 2.
Poop, and we were gone.
Okay, so we're closing the breakout rooms. People should be rejoining. Oops.
I accidentally backed out of my session.
That's okay. That's good. We're rejoining. See how this goes. Okay. Hold on.
It's that happy clicking getting me into trouble again, Leah.
Yeah.
I was thinking of that same thing.
All right. Now, this is only want to go to current slide. All right. Hold on. Who wants to? So is everybody back? Anybody not back? Oops. My current slide. So group number 1. My PowerPoint. Okay. Group number 1 looked at this photograph, which is known as the Horowitz Synagogue. It's in Germany, and who would like to speak from group number 1 to tell us your observations, what you saw, what you didn't see, what you wonder? Who would like to speak from group number 1?
I nominate Ruth.
Okay.
Oh.
All right. Don't worry. We're all
okay.
No judgment.
So we're talking, what did we see? Well, we see the destruction of the synagogue.
Yes.
And where it's, the date is Kristallnacht, so we know that it was set deliberately, the fire and the destruction was set deliberately. We observed that there were a lot of people watching, but that it didn't seem that anybody was attempting to put out the fire, or we don't see anybody attempting to rescue the Torah, for instance, from the synagogue. I know some synagogues people did get the Torah out, but and we also observed that it seems like maybe some people in the crowd are officials of some sort.
Okay.
And we wondered about if anything was rescued from the synagogue.
Mm-hmm.
We wondered also who was in the crowd watching. Were there people in the crowd who were members of that temple?
Mm-hmm.
And
what don't you see in this picture, in this photograph?
Well, we didn't see anybody trying to put out the fire.
Right. Okay.
Did I get everything, group 1? Also wondered what was nearby.
Oh, yes.
Anything else surrounding it that was burning or not burning, and what kind of buildings were nearby?
Right. So we see people, citizens of the town. We may see some officials, people watching. It's definitely looked like a huge synagogue. Looks like.
Oh, I think Sherry froze on us here. And that's the fun of doing virtual programming. see if we can get her back.
So on the U.S. Holocaust Museum webpage, there's a map of Germany, and it has marked the places where synagogues were destroyed during Kristallnacht.
That would be a nice addition to this lesson, whatever that looked like.
I'm just going to move on to group 2. Who would like to speak about this particular photo? What do you see? What do you think? What do you wonder? What were the other questions that you generated in your group? Who would like to speak? Because I don't know who was in group 2, so.
I'll do it. So I don't know if you all can see the photograph, but it is called Legal Looters at a Jewish-Owned Store. So this is Kristallnacht. I assume it would be the next day, or maybe something that after most of the violence is over, and you see many well-dressed men and women and some children also who are just helping themselves to the things in the store, going through the broken windows. And you also see some people just walking past them on the street while all of these looters are taking whatever it is that they want from this store. So we tossed out some ideas as to, why they might want to do this, ideas about Jews being, rich or having too much, or, maybe these people being entitled to the things that are there. And we talked about how this seems to be totally okay. And nobody in this image seems to mind that it's happening.
Okay, so I unfortunately just lost my internet connection, so I missed a few of the things that you said. So I apologize. That's what happens when there's so many people on the internet in your community. You could lose a connection. So did you mention anything about the baby carriages?
We talked a little bit about parents using them to fill up. Don't know if they came from the store or if they brought them from home, but would you use maybe your child's baby carriage or that of a friend or a neighbor to rob from somebody else?
Exactly, polluting. And who were the people? Did you say who the people were in this particular photo?
Just men and women. We mentioned that they looked very well dressed.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like these are people barely existing on the fringes of society who haven't eaten in weeks and are desperate. They look like people you'd pass on the road, people that might be your neighbors.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we don't see law enforcement doing anything because these are Jewish-owned stores. So great. Thank you. Thank you for that. And let's go to our last photograph. And let's see if I could. And who in group number 3 would like to describe this one? And this one actually has a caption on it. So please describe what you think is going on here and your thoughts about it. Who in group number 3?
I can go ahead and do it. And
Great.
if someone else wants to chime in, that's fine. We had a picture of a bunch of SS women and men running down a ramp, and someone was like next to them playing an accordion. And some of the stuff that stood out was, it was almost like they were dancing, they were happy, celebrating and having a good time. And that kind of goes along with the caption did say it was an SS retreat. And so evidently it was something that they were doing, and it looks like it was like a party and a festive type atmosphere. it really it made us wonder how people could actually be involved in the things that these SS men and women did, and then be able to separate it and actually go out and have, a good time after, engaging in, brutality and other things like that. And then what broader questions? What exact, to me, one was what exactly went on at an SS retreat? What would they do? And again, going back to, being able to separate, how would you separate, working in a camp like that, that they were in? It does mention the camp's name. I can't remember it. And yet, going out and having a good time after work, after, engaging in that type of horrible behavior. And as I said, if there's anyone else from the group that wants to add something, feel free to.
Even if you're not in the group and you want to add something, feel free. So, we talked about that idea of, very graphic photographs. So to me, this is like one of the most chilling photographs, and this is a very personal, subjective response that you could see in the Holocaust. And it's not a picture of bodies but that people, and this is a very human looking picture. We all have pictures where we've gathered with friends and colleagues and we're having a good time. But the disconnection, as you said so eloquently, Tony, from what was really happening is just stunning about how people could separate themselves in such a way that they can have these joyous moments when they're involved in the processing of people. And in summer 1944, as many of you know, the number of transports arriving at Auschwitz were at a record speed, and people were being processed through the selection and at lightning speed. And that we could see this as if nothing is happening is just amazing. So every photograph has a story to tell. I'd like to kind of move into two reflection questions. How did the actions of ordinary people shape the events of the Holocaust, and what conclusions can you make about the photos that we just saw? So my Zoom is acting funny, and let me just get my chat back up. Who would like to chat or speak? Feel free. I'm going to put back their reflection questions. Who would
Sherry, may I say something?
Please. Who's speaking?
Matthew Christiansen. One of the things when we're talking about that third picture of the SS people just having a good time, because I didn't get to see that picture, but I could imagine it. When I was with the museum in late February, early March to go to Birkenau and Auschwitz before the COVID happened. When we were on our second day of walking through Birkenau, one of the gentlemen that was with us had just muttered something. He was just reflecting to himself about how normal. He goes, "Wow, just normal people being able to do this." And all of a sudden, our tour guide just was like, "No, these were not normal people. These are not regular people." And to touch on the Stanley Milgram experiment, because I also have taught psychology for a number of years. We often talk about how with the Milgram experiment, perceived people who are perceived to be in authority roles seem to just have this control over people to do things. But our guide kind of disproved that whole some of Milgram's work there, in the fact that She said, these were not normal people. These weren't everyday run-of-the-mill people. The people who ran the places like Auschwitz, places like Birkenau, they were not your everyday run-of-the-mill type of German, or these people were Waffen-SS. These were not, these people, of course, decided, they knew what was going on in these camps, and they chose to be there. They chose to bring about the terror and torture of the people there. And that, I think, speaks volumes about just how far human nature can go. And it's something that I think people really need to wrestle with in this day and age.
Excuse me, I think we lost Sherry again. Unfortunately. Let's see. So I see, Henry, that you dropped something in the chat. Oh, just another of the women. Yes, female SS officers, auxiliary force.
They're sitting on a fence after eating in this one, and it's like they all look super sad, but also very happy at the same time. So it's kind of like, it's odd.
Yes, Matt.
I just wanted to pick up on Matthew Christiansen's point. I agree with everything he said. I just, the one thing I would add to it is that I think it's important to acknowledge that while what like the SS guards did was monstrous, I think sometimes it is an excuse to just call them monsters and stop thinking about it. They are a product of a society that allowed them to act that way. And in some way, of course, they made the decision to act the way they did, but I know a lot of people just write them off as monsters, and then you don't have to interrogate what humanity is capable of. And so I know that, like, when we teach the Holocaust, it can be very personal because a lot of it is using it as a mirror to think hard about yourself and what types of small prejudices you hold that you just tolerate on a daily basis, that you just like let yourself hold on to, and how that can really twist people over time. So I think that's important, is to acknowledge their humanity. So perhaps they're not normal people. Of course, they chose to do what they did, but they're normal in the sense that they didn't do anything that I'm not capable of myself.
And that's what I'm saying. That should really, really, we need to really take stock in that and think long and hard. Like I said, Milgram's work was groundbreaking. It was, but that was the same thought I had as we were going. And then our guide Agnieszka was like, no, these are not your everyday run of the mill people. And then my thought went to someplace completely different. And then when I read that book, From the Heart of Hell, Zalman Gordovsky goes directly to that point. And he does not call them people in his writings. I mean, he calls them monsters, he calls them demons, he calls them beasts, because it was beyond his understanding as to how anyone could do this to anyone else. But yeah, I agree with you on quite a bit. But yeah, the society shaped this to allow it to get to that point. No, I agree with you, Matt.
Sherry, I know you're back with us, but you're muted.
Mute, sorry.
Sorry.
You know what? I do webinar and today there's something with my my internet. It was flipping out a little. So you remember that the idea of grace. So I know you all didn't see, I think, all the photographs. I apologize. This is, we live in a funky time. So I appreciate your understanding and support and your willingness. So we instead of maybe taking a break, why don't you just raise your hand? we can end a few minutes early, and if you need to take a bio break, go ahead. But I would just like to get through the material, and then we'll just break a few minutes early, because I'm afraid to go with the internet too long. Is everybody okay with that? If you're not, please let me know. Okay. So, okay, so let's do that. And so I wanted to mention a couple things before we kind of move on a little bit to our conclusion, but to talk about rescue and aid, and a few points to keep in mind. Let's see, I'm getting a message from Liz. Liz says the conversation about the guards not being normal people is interesting. I had a long conversation with Eva Core in the Warsaw airport about how she felt that many of the perpetrators were victims themselves and did not want to participate but had no choice. Different perspective. You know, this is definitely a very personal response. You know, we all, even if you are a prisoner and you feel you have no choice, or you're in that perpetrator, in my opinion, and this is a great conversation, we all have some degree of choice. You know, our mind is always still going to be our mind. If you've ever read the book, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, you know, here were people at Auschwitz who had nothing, had their identities were taken away, the most depraved circumstances that you could think, but people still had their minds and had hope, and those who dreamed of a future had maybe a little bit more strength to survive. So I think there's always some level of choice. Maybe it's not a lot, but it could be a little bit more. If anybody else wants to chime in on that idea, please feel free to comment on it. But what I was going to, and go ahead and write that in the chat box, a few things I want you to keep in mind about rescue. So individuals in every country, European country, from all religious backgrounds, risk their lives to help Jews. And rescue efforts ranged from very isolated actions to very organized networks, both large and small. And those willing to help Jews endangered faced severe consequences if they were caught. And they came from every religious background that you could imagine. And whether they saved thousands of people or a single life, those who rescued Jews during the Holocaust demonstrated the possibility of individual choice, even in the most extreme circumstances. And it's important for students to know that those who are rescued really were the exception. And we've been saying that throughout this section. And that they were actually a very small portion of the population. And they were not extraordinary people, but normal people with human faults, even though they performed very righteous acts. And ordinary people can perform extraordinary acts. And their difference and their actions could be the difference between life and death, and hope and not hope, as we saw in Philip's testimony. And while some attempts were successful, most attempts failed the victim. And in some cases, both the rescuer and the victim were caught and, were murdered. Yad Vashem has a program called Righteous Among the Nations. You may know that, where people who've done righteous deed or attempted to do righteous deed were recognized. And we see 26,000 people recognized, and that's growing over time. Tony says, after my father was liberated, he was enlisted in the Polish Guard. One of his duties was to guard the SS soldiers. He said most showed no remorse, and they would fight and even kill the ones that did. And Leah said, when the Mats were talking about the SS, I think a good descriptive word is enabled. The government was created in such a way that enabled these acts to be carried out in a variety of degrees. So absolutely. So we're skipping our break. And I want to move on to this quote from Meep Geese. And I'm sure many of you know Meep. She was one of the helpers of Anne Frank and the other people who lived in the secret annex. And her and her husband were recognized as righteous among the nations. And because of her efforts and the efforts of the others, the Frank family were able to live 2 years in hiding. And here's a quote. People sometimes call me a hero. I don't like it because people should never think you have to be a special person to help those who need you. I myself am just a very common person. I simply had no choice. Okay, so I'd like, and let's see, I don't know if I'm testing the technology gods, but if you have Menti, if you could get on another device and go to menti.com and then put in the code 643426. I have a question I'd like everybody to answer. So I'd like to get as many people as possible respond to the question. Okay, that I pose about being a hero. And go to menti.com. Let's see if I can escape and open Menti. Let's see if it opens. I'm going to my presentation.
Can you share the code again?
Yes, the code, let's see. I'm gonna, as soon as I open the presentation, it has the code on it. Okay. Presentation, hold on. Okay, 643426. The question is, do you think it is dangerous to label people as heroes even today? Why or why not? So one of the reasons to kind of put ourselves into these little technology experiences is to introduce them to you if you're not familiar with them. And since many of you will be teaching online or on hybrid, these are great tools to use. I really like Menti. It has a word cloud option. You go to mentimeter.com to program your questions or what you'd like people to respond to, and then they give you a code. It's free, and then people can respond. So I'll be quiet so you could think. Why do you think it is dangerous to label people as heroes? Or do you think it's dangerous? Why or why not? What I like about this is we get to see everybody's responses next to each other. I see some awesome responses. Awesome responses. The one thing I wish this did was put your name next to your response, but in a way that's also interesting that it's a little anonymous. So I'm just going to read some of them. Do you think it's dangerous or not? No, but it can develop a society where people think they need to be more, you don't need to be special to help others. Yikes, I see both sides, but no, it is important in this troubled world to have something to aspire to. It depends on the ideology of the person labeling someone a hero. I can see both sides here. People are heroes when they stand up for or save others who are in peril. They deserve to be recognized. And I feel that sharing their heroism could help fuel more acts. No more room for my other thoughts. It does lend them an otherworldly aura. And then it's easy to forget that they are human too. Labeling a big group of people as heroes can be dangerous. There are always a few bad apples in the bunch, but there are people who are heroic that might not be in that group. Concern is that hero is used too often. We need acts of kindness and concern, not the exception. Children need heroes to help them develop their ability to become someone who will choose to help others and to be compassionate. The definition of a hero is a problem, as it is not talent that makes a hero. Choices. Oh, that's great. I think there are some people who take liberties with the word hero, but when someone is truly heroic, they can serve as a true example. Sometimes we need just that. Calling perpetrators monsters, calling individuals, makes one feel he or she is unable to do something heroic. I think that's very much at the crux. One could do heroic acts as an everyday individual. I think it depends on the way you do it. Regular people are heroic every day and deserve praise, but we want to emphasize people's humanity. The only difference between heroes and villains is their choice. Okay. If I didn't read yours, I apologize. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so great. Thank you for that. So we also have student action planning resources in Echoes and Reflections, where students could identify an issue, they could figure out a solution. You know, we want students to think about the role that they could play in their own community, and they don't have to save the world. They can do something very small and simple, like form a group. You know, there's all kinds of issues that students have to deal with in their lives, and finding those solutions can really be empowering. And so we have an action planning guide in Echoes and Reflections, where students can really do a project. And you know, the first step is asking them what concerns them and maybe what they can help. Has anybody done a student acting a project in their classroom that they want to share? Does anybody want to share? Anybody do any student action planning? You know, that's taking what they learned and maybe applying and seeing, you know, how they can be an upstander in their schools and in their communities. Liz, oh, Mandy first, please. I'm sorry, Mandy.
Well, ours hasn't been quite this fancy, but typically at the end of the year when we finish up and we're looking at the modern world, I ask them to identify like the biggest problem facing my generation. And they do a little research and then they put forth a potential solution to that problem based on, you know, the research and, you know, what they've experienced and what they see in their lives.
Very nice. Liz.
The last time that I took my students to candles, Eva had said that one of her things is that you can change the world even if it's small. And she talks about, you know, either cleaning your room or something like that. And she pulled out one of those, the trash grabbers, you know what I'm talking about, with the big long thing. And she said, you could just pick up trash. And all my students laughed hysterically and they took that back. And so for like weeks after that, they were constantly pointing out trash in the hallway and would pick up the trash. I know it's something silly, but it was something that stuck with them about Eva and how you can change just one little tiny thing.
Right, right. And Henry.
I've done things like this in Boy Scouts. I did several leadership trainings in Boy Scouts, and we did something very similar to this with the different leadership skills that we learned in the Boy Scout trainings.
So yes, some states do require action planning, and it would be nice to see, you know, anytime students could kind of gather around and do something positive. I think the rewards can sometimes be very satisfying. All right, so let's bring our program today to a close with Eva, because she's really been our spiritual guide today. And it's amazing, her impact is still being felt even though she's not physically on our planet. And she's made some very interesting choices in her life. You know, she really turned what even she would, I think, describe as her rage at you know, and that you see rage in a lot of survivors about this tremendous loss of power, what based on their experience, and turn that into something so positive. And she became a fierce activist. And these are two pictures that the museum shared, and you may have seen these before, of a trip that she went with this Dr. Munch, who was a Nazi at Auschwitz. And she was brave to take him to Auschwitz with her, and he agreed. And she went on this trip, and this is when she came up with this declaration of amnesty at the 50th anniversary, where she says that she is forgiving. I don't want to take the time to read it all. I'm sure you've seen this before, where she is letting go, and she's doing this on a very personal basis. She is not speaking for other survivors. She's only speaking for herself. And she is granting amnesty and forgiveness to those who perpetrated crimes on her and other victims of the Holocaust, which I think is a very powerful message. So let's think about this. Why do you think Eva decided to forgive the Nazis, and what are your thoughts and reactions to what she did? There are many survivors who will say, I can't forgive. And it's a very personal, so, you know, I told you my father was a Holocaust survivor. He wasn't as inclined to be as forgiving, but I feel that was his choice. So what do you think it was for Eva? Some of you may have spoken. Some of you may have spoken to Eva about this. Why do you think she was able to forgive, or what purpose did it serve? So go ahead and put your name into the chat box. And who would like to? Liz, please respond.
I feel like I'm talking too much, but
no.
It was kind of a passion for me. Her big thing was that she needed to let go of the anger. She was noticing how much it was affecting her life. And I would urge anyone who has not seen her new documentary, Eva, and then her number, and I'm not going to say the number correctly, so I'm not going to say it, but it's just right. Eva and her number. You get to see a different side of Eva. I never knew the angry side of Eva, because I met her later in life when she had forgiven. But you see the turmoil that she was in, and how it was still burdening her soul, and how she just was this very angry, traumatized person, and forgiving was setting her free. That's how she always said it, was that she felt so much lighter and she was set free. And it was for her and not for them. It doesn't matter if they showed remorse or not, but she feels much better, and she can go on and live her life and talk about peace.
Yeah. You know, that's a pretty amazing thought. I mean, you can't blame somebody for feeling bitter and whatever, but she really transcended it, and I think she did do it for herself. I would love to know what Amber or Leah, who really, you know, are at the museum and heard her, and what are your why do you think that she did it? I'd like to ask them.
If you don't mind, Amber, I'll jump in.
Yeah, I was gonna say this is you.
Eva and I spent a lot of time talking about forgiveness. In fact, I have a rough draft of her version of a forgiveness book. But I would echo what Liz said, but then I would add, she wanted to be free. She didn't know how. For 50 years, she had tried things, and she told me, this is the first thing that worked. And it worked. And if it wouldn't have, she would have kept trying, because she needed to figure out how to give herself that power back. She needed to feel okay to be happy. But this forgiveness was what worked. It was what clicked for her, and it was what set her free. But if it wouldn't have, she would have kept going until she found something else.
Yeah. Wow. Anybody else? Amber, do you want to add to that?
I unfortunately didn't have an opportunity to spend a whole lot of time with Eva. But the time that I did get to spend with her, she had mentioned several times what Leah had said about how it really, and I see that Tony said it in the chat as well, that it allowed her to not carry that burden anymore. It kind of set her free. And I know that sort of shift in her thinking was also very instrumental in the lives of other survivors that she touched. I have a friend who is a survivor of the genocide in Rwanda against the Tutsi, and he mentions, he talks about the time that he met with Eva all the time, and that he didn't believe necessarily at first when she said it's going to set you free, it's going to let you release that anger, until he finally, turned that lens in upon himself and really analyzed and said, I've got to try it. And now he speaks about forgiveness and reconciliation himself, because it allowed him to feel free.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, who suffers? It's that person. It's like a continuation of suffering. I think it's, to me, I've watched the documentary and I got to know Eva a little bit more when I was preparing for this, and I am just, that message, it just knocks my head off, I'd say. And Matt, what would you like to add? Matt F.
Hope I won't water down what everybody else said, because it was pretty powerful stuff. But when I've seen interviews with her and going through it, it was empowering. Like, she took this and she turned it into, instead of people telling her how to react, she went ahead and took ownership of it, and this was empowering for her. And I keep seeing this the more that, looking at doing some social justice work and looking at abolitionist teaching now. And I was on a webinar with Bethany Love the other day, and she was saying how you have to have joy in the work. It can't just come from a place of anger. You have to find your place of joy to help others and to help the community, humans in general. And I get the same kind of vibe with this. It's empowering, and we have to do this with joy, so it helps everybody.
So well said. I copied this from I don't know if it was a documentary or something that she said. It says, when she returned to Auschwitz, I don't come back as a victim. I come back as a victorious survivor. That could make me cry in a second. How it's a transformative identity. She was they left out, you know, they felt victimized at one point, but then she became an eyewitness, a spokesperson. You know, she delivered a moral message to change the future and to give people a direction about forgiveness from the worst. You know, when you look at the hierarchy of people who had experienced it, I mean, she had, you know, a terrible, horrific experience. And yet she found this place. It's amazing. Any final words or thoughts? We started in looking at the complicity, about how ordinary, you know, this could only happen with the help of very ordinary people. And everybody of all walks of life participated, some more directly, some indirectly, but yet, you know, we also saw the range of behavior. And then we also saw the response of a survivor to turn her life around and be someone said, a shining light, a guiding star. And I could understand how a museum could really build their message around one person who has this great message. In the chat box, Amber is going to put an evaluation survey that we need you to complete. You can't really read it on this one, but she put it in. We ask that you kindly complete that survey. You could do it right now. We want you to stay connected and involved, and maybe take other we have 1 hour webinars and all kinds of courses that you could sign up for. I give you a lot of credit. I know how challenging these times are for teachers, and especially when the future is uncertain as to what your circumstances are, and that you took time, 3 hours. It's not easy to sit for 3 hours for something like this. I want to give you a round of applause for being part of it, and to continue your learning, to be a better educator. I know the more I learn about the Holocaust, the better educator it helps to make me, and to think about who I am as a person. And I want to thank again you and Leah and Amber, and I apologize for the little glitches I had today, and your patience, and I wish you all the best this year. It's as you face these challenges, and maybe next year at this time we'll be in a very different place with this virus. I certainly hope so. None of us could have imagined. If you have any final thoughts and want to speak, please put your name in the chat box or send your message. But I want to thank all of you for being part of this today. And it's been an honor for me to be part of this. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sherry.
Yes, thank you, Sherry, and thank you to everyone who took time out of your day today to come learn with us. You will be receiving from me a certificate of completion with PGP points, as well as a resource list that Sherry has from Echoes and Reflections. And then, of course, Candles also always we have our own little survey that we really appreciate you filling out. So thank you again, and yeah, take care. And as always, we are here to help you with anything that you need.
Thank you for filling out the survey. If you don't see it, you could just scroll in the chat box. But we really appreciate it, and we hope you'll tune in to more programs and visit our website, echoesandreflections.org. It is free and open to everyone, and it's really been a pleasure.